What's good with the YouTube? You already know Big Flacco with a Convicts reaction where we smash, dash, and react. Please hit the bell notification. Please hit the like button, comment, do all those things to help support this channel. And we got another interesting reaction, man. One of my favorite all-time movies, and more so for the acting. Time era, when I was a teenager. Blood In, Blood Out, also known as Bound by Honor. 3 hours. This movie's about what, 2.5, 3 hours, man. Let's go my reaction to it, man. Now watching it nowadays, after experiencing my own little prison bid, being involved with criminal organizations and whatnot. Um, this movie, like I said, is for theatrics. There's a lot of far fetched things that you see in this movie that are not true, especially in California prison system. One, you would never see any of these groups paying rent to any type of Aryan or white movement. They would not be controlling any of these prisons like they show in this movie, like Red Rider and all that. Um, None of that disrespect would be taken, period. Um, Now, well, you will see some during the 70s and 80s and 60s. You would see some white groups have a lot of pull with correction officers because most correction officers were white, had racist agendas and whatnot. Um, but overall, like I said, this movie was more about theatrics. It was entertaining. Like there's some punchlines in this movie that to this day, we'll be talking about Popeye. Give me some chon and hey little puppy. You know, Stuff like that will be, crack my ass up or me too, Popeye, me too. You know, just little slangs like hey Cinderella, go find yourself a fella. Like Popeye had the ultimate one liners. Rosito, man, he showed up, the real life struggle with addiction. Though, there were some true aspects to that life that, addiction affects a lot of different people. Um, the cop, though, people do switch up when they become law enforcement. Those that were once in the hood, and I think they showed in a good limelight how an officer who used to be a gang member could now all of a sudden think he's better than the gang he used to represent. Um, Miklo's story, though, what they made him go through, uh, you know, I don't know how it was in the 60s and 70s, right? But if you were rocking with one particular group, that group's going to defend you and back your play to the fullest, no matter what. Um, you would never see the amount of disrespect that you see in this movie ever when I was in prison. Now, don't get me wrong, there was times in prison where a group may be more in control. There may be some disrespect slogans or whatnot, or some talking out the door or this and that, right? But eventually, you're gonna have to pay the piper. Eventually, it's gonna come back to you. Um, the staged attack um, when they moved on all the whites, that was a little far fetched, in the way in which they did it. Um, but some of the parts would hold true, like having a ledger for gambling rackets and criminal operations. That could be true to a certain extent during this time frame. Taking proceeds to reestablish different facilities. You know, uh, Having a council to vote and make decisions. Recruiting. Blood in, blood out. Those type of things actually do happen within some of these criminal organizations. It's just the way in which they try to categorize, you know, the whites as being a superior group would be far fetched in the system. Each group would be vying for control, and it's kind of hard when you have traditionally two, Mexican groups that are usually in control of these facilities, which would be the MA and NF. In this movie, they only had one group, um, but it's a good storyline, and I like how it showed how the streets were not as established as like American Me showed that they were all established and that they had all this stuff going on, and it was a little bit more embellished. The streets in, blood out, almost looked a little bit real. You know, um, a lot of groups were out there trying to vie for control and power and territory and whatnot, and they kind of showed that type of lifestyle. And they also showed a chain of command with lieutenants and captains and so forth, which would be similar to that of the NF. You know, um, I don't think any of these groups pretty much were, mirrored to be one way or another when they made this movie. I thought they made it for entertainment purposes, and at that time, the gangbanging scene had been really huge in the late 80s and 90s, making movies, and so did American Me. So I think they did a follow up to make a movie that was similar to it. Now my reaction to it is it's an entertaining movie to this day. You know, some of it, like I said, they put a 10 on a one. You know what I mean? They made it look a little bit more glamorized and glorified a little bit. Um, the set trip and the videos and so forth. That's how it was during those time periods, man. That's how people dressed. That's how people acted. Catching a murder case and being able to get out. Those are actually realities. Interstate transfer, that stuff kind of happened. Um, the drug trade, that kind of stuff was one of the key rackets that occurred within the prison system was the drug addiction and controlling the drug trade. That's always been the number one market for income for any of these groups. Uh, Prostitution, they had prostitutes like that back in the days. So there is a lot of stuff that looks real when you watch this movie, but don't don't ever think that this movie is accurate in any form or fashion. There's just similarities to certain things. You know, um, the I don't think any of these groups would let any outsiders come into their territory trying to run shit or dictate things or owe money. Like the dude from New York. Um, Having that many parolees staying at one house, I don't think that would also be able to be, something that was legit. But if you're looking for a good movie with some good punchlines, where they have that stilo, they have the look like cholos and whatnot, it's a good movie. And I think that there is a message in this movie that sometimes we become so infatuated with that lifestyle that we become that lifestyle. I think Miklo in his story in the movie was he was always trying to prove himself so far that once he obtained any type of role, he would hold on to that by any means necessary. I think it shows a pattern of him always being looked at as inferior because of the way his pigment color was. So he was always having to prove himself, whether it was with Paco or with Santana or not Santana, fucking what's his name, the Jefe, the metal. Um, Magic was a cool character, and you also had Danny Trejo was in the movie. You had Billy Bob Thornton. You know, uh, I think that some of the titles and the way in which they portrayed it, is a little bit different than what it would be really in real life. You're not going to have two groups at a fence talking and cell soldiering and the whites disrespecting any of these groups like they did. I think as an outsider that's never been in California prison system, if you're watching this movie and you base all your information about California up on this movie, you're gonna have a lot of misleading information. But there's some cool parts to the movie, man. Some of the pegadas, the big house scenes were fucking funny as fuck. Um, like some of the one-liners, like I said, you know, my favorite character in the movie was probably fucking Popeye. Used to crack me up, man. I got to meet the dude, man, and he's a funny character. Crucito was pretty cool as well, man. Um, Paco was kind of a little arrogant, even as a cop. He had that same type of attitude. And then Chewy was funny too, as well, man. Who are you fighting, Chewy? Tres puntos. You know, but I think my favorite part is when that one dude Spider and the whole audio they just fucked up Crucito and they're up in the hills talking about I'm gonna build a house and stuff and they fucking planned to hit these dudes in the morning and they came from all different angles. The whistles, the strategy, and how, Miklo came all fucking crazy and how Paco was fucking just made made Spider look a bitch and then carved a VL Picasso in him. And what I'm saying? I thought that's probably my favorite part is when he tells him fucking Chucky, get up. You know what I mean? 'Cause at first Spider's like, you want to throw down puto chinga tu madre. Wow. He's just all pumped up and shit, man. But it's probably one of my favorites. I think American Me was more realities to it. There was certain parts of the movie that were very major that were not factually based. And that caused a lot of fucking issues with the Mexican mafia, having issues with Edward James Olmos and some of the actors who contributed to the movie. Um, which the one thing about this movie is they didn't try to, overshadow the South or the North in it. It was just basically one group, one agenda, and it kind of goes to show what could potentially be there if the Raza were united. It also showed the power struggle. You know what I'm saying? When Carlos wanted to branch off and establish his own context behind the walls. It showed that, look, man, you know what I'm saying? Rasa are always challenging Rasa, and there's always those that feel like they have the one agenda that's better than the next. And so did Miklo and fucking Magic. You know what I'm saying? They had an agenda that they thought was best, so they went outside of the realm of their commitments to make that happen. They had the BGA member hit. You know, there's been yet to really be one prison movie that I've seen that is accurate. You know, Shot Caller was far fetched. American Me was probably the closest, but there were certain things that would have never happened, and there were certain mistruths that they put in that movie. You know, I get showing Cheyenne or Santana getting killed by his own people shows the betrayal, corruption within these groups, but you still they offended a lot of people because that whole issue and scene, right? The truth behind that scene is what started a fucking 50-year war, basically that went on for years. 50, yeah, about 40-something-year war between these groups. And I think Blood In, Blood Out, they did a good job as far as showing people this is entertainment. You know, people like the theatrics, they like the drama, they like to know about the prison gangs. You know, back then they used to love that Cholo Stilo. You know what I'm saying? And it kind of showed the realities, but it also kind of showed these groups looking a little bit more inferior than what they were. You know, more power behind the walls, but less power out there in the streets. So I'm hoping eventually, man, that there becomes a movie that puts each group more in a true lighting. You know what I'm saying? Like, not everything the anime did was always, you know, they didn't just run through every fucking group. They were one of the most strongest groups, if not the strongest group during that time era. You know, the NF little brother came caught up in the late 70s. By then they were separated. That's when they had Babo and all that. But there's been yet to be any movies that has shown any of these groups in a true setting of how they operated, the struggles they went through, the corruption. And I think that if someone put together a movie that was accurate, that was close to being accurate, with the positive theatrics from Hollywood, I think you'd have a blockbuster, man. But I still think that too many producers and whatnot are worried because of the Edward James Olmos situation, you know. But why does Hollywood overshadow and not look at what's going to pretty soon be one of the biggest populations in the United States, which is the you know Latino community? Why don't they just show them in different limelights? I don't know. You know what I'm saying it's a lot of politics in Hollywood, but I think that there's time for each of these groups to have a movie that's based upon their truth. But I also think that there needs to be some positive ends to it as well. You know, someone changing their life for the betterment and living um, under a falsehood of what they believe in. Because the one thing about the Latino community is a lot of these communities are very tribal, territorial, if not, and a lot of egos are there. And I think that's always what's pushed, you know, the unification towards common goals away from each other is that right there. You know what I'm saying? Therefore, you have to create a common enemy in order for everybody to be able to coexist, which is what's been happening since the end of hostilities. Anyways, good movie. Like I said, just separate the reality from the fake. With that said, it's your boy Flacco, Convicts Reaction. My thoughts, my views.